You are listening to the Conscious Leader Podcast, brought to you by Serenity Ventures. We talk to leaders who serve humanity, such as entrepreneurs, healers, teachers, and more, to learn about their formative experiences, their daily routines and mindful practices, as well as their values, struggles, and dreams. This episode is sponsored by Serenity Ventures. Serenity Ventures is the go-to support network for impact-driven businesses. Serenity Ventures delivers a blend of coaching, content, community, and events to help business leaders prevent burnout while growing their bottom lines in a way that improves society and the environment. Are you an entrepreneur in the health and wellness or sustainability space? Are you scaling your business and feeling overwhelmed, stressed, and at risk for burnout? Are you generating 6 or 7 figures and want to uplevel your growth and contribution while having fun with the process? Are you looking for a community and support system to help your business and lifestyle get to the next level? Well, if this sounds like you, go to serenityventures.org and request a free consultation that'll introduce you to evidence-based mindfulness practices that will improve your personal well-being and organizational health. Your time to up-level your business and lifestyle is now. Go to serenityventures.org and request your free consultation call today. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another episode of the Conscious Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Mitchell, and we have Stefanos Sifandos in the house with us today. Very excited for this episode. A little bit about Stefanos. His mission is to help you reconnect with your truth and empower you to create the abundant life that you deserve. He facilitates transformational growth through neuro-empowerment practices and integration of spiritual praxis and Western psychology to improve and enhance the quality of your relationships. He believes that intimate relationships and sacredness is union and is a direct path to enlightenment and freedom. I know I could speak a lot more about you, but let's just jump right in. Thanks for being here, Stefanos. I'm really excited for this one.
Yeah, thank you for having me, brother. I'm super excited to be here as well.
Right on. I kind of want to just jump right into the meat and bones of kind of your work. You do a lot of work. You talk a lot about men's work and what it means to, have healthy masculinity, and it sounds like you had a huge journey in that. So first, I'd love to hear a little bit about that story, and then also just kind of like what is this male condition that you speak of, and let's use that as a launching point.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the male condition that I speak of at this point in time in contemporary times is really one that most of us are having difficulty with grasping and understanding. And that's why I think it's important that we have this conversation around what does it mean to be a man in today's world? What does it mean to be a man in relation to self, in relation to one's purpose, in relation to what's important to one's life, and then also in relation to relationship and to one's environment. And so now more than ever, with gender fluidity and binary gender being, I almost want to say, a thing of the past, the fact that it's being spoken about, that we're beyond male and female in terms of cultural terms, it's putting pressure on older definitions of what it means to show up in the world in a particular way. And so that's very fascinating to me. And so I am immersed in men's work in that sense, but also gender studies and understanding relationships and how we're now relating to new ideas and ways of being in the world, but also how we're relating to ourselves as individuals and the labels that we put on ourselves. My own
Mhm.
personal journey in terms of understanding masculinity or manhood or manliness or just being a man has, like most people, there's layers to that. There's been so many layers to that.
Mm.
And so if I were to start anywhere, it was really for me, it was being a man in the world, just being a human being in the world that I wasn't happy with. And it required me to hit rock bottom several times and be dragged across the rock face of rock bottom,
Mhm.
to really make some changes and
Yo
transformations.
What weren't you happy with? What was why were you scraping on rock bottom? What was that like?
Yeah, I wasn't happy with how I was feeling about myself, my level of
Mm.
self-worth and my self-confidence. I wasn't happy with the incessant feelings of agitation and frustration, and
Mm.
anger and aggression and rage that I was feeling as a man. I wasn't happy with the way I was treating others and treating myself, but treating others. I was dishonest in intimate relationship. I was unfaithful in intimate relationship.
Mm.
And so I would be in this perpetual cycle of guilt and shame and anger and lashing out and projection and ego. And it was just I felt so much pressure on so many levels. I had to be this type of man. If I wasn't successful outwardly, if I didn't have money, if I didn't have this label, if I didn't have this car, if I didn't have this title, if I wasn't doing enough, then I wasn't enough as a man and as a human being. I wasn't contributing enough. And so
Mm.
these collective, general social pressures that I was feeling, I'm not new to feeling that.
Mhm.
Definitely not. We feel it as men and women in the world because we live in a masculine dominated society, but in an extreme expression where we're compensating and we're sacrificing. So we're doing excessively. It's all about, see, one of the masculine domains is around achievement and completion and doing and creating in the world in that way. And we excessively do that in our world, and it puts a lot of pressure on us, and we sacrifice other values because of that.
Yeah.
And I found that I just wasn't happy with the extreme behavior that I was engaged in.
Mm. So you're kind of acting, and I imagine people who might be listening, and a lot of men out there are kind of living their life in kind of a robotic sense, in a
Yeah,
non-autonomous sense, where they're just kind
yeah,
of tuned into what society's supposed to tell you to do, get a good job, make some money, have family, whatever else. I imagine is that kind of what you're experiencing? That's kind of
that
the
was,
ideal
yeah.
image of a man. Yeah. Um,
And there was
so what?
friction there.
Yeah. Right. So what was that? Was there a moment or like how did you discover like fuck, I don't want to live this way anymore? Was there a moment in time?
Yeah,
Did it build up? Like what happened there?
both. It built up, and from the build up, there was a moment. And so, what I found, just to give you some very brief background,
Hmm.
I grew up in a violent and aberrant family dynamic. I grew up in a physically and emotionally abusive family dynamic, and that was consistent and also very volatile because there was also love that was there as well, and that was very confusing as a child. But what happened was I left all that unchecked. I suppressed that. I isolated that within myself, and I carried that pain, that wounding, and that trauma into my adult relationships, unchecked, unknown, unfamiliar, just not connected.
Hmm.
And so I behaved in a way that was entrenched in survival and entrenched in fear and entrenched in scarcity. And it really disrupted my relationships and it hurt me in the process. And so, one of my relationships, I was with a woman for a few years, and this was a number of years ago, about 6 years ago. And she
Hmm.
found out that I was being unfaithful in that relationship. And it really unwound not only the relationship, but my own self. Because that was the first time that I had witnessed what my actions were doing to someone else, that I was being unfaithful and dishonest and really not showing up in integrity and authenticity, which are
Hmm.
virtues that I valued. I
Yep.
just couldn't fully live them.
Mm.
And I was choosing not to live them because I was indirectly choosing not to live them because I was directly choosing not to look at my stuff that was really hindering my growth as a man in the world. And so that for me was a very pivotal moment. And it was the beginning of the end. It was the beginning of the end of the old self. And it was the beginning of a new self, but it came with a lot of pain.
Mm.
I went through life experiencing suicidal thoughts and tendencies,
Mm.
and really breaking down the substructures of my own psyche, my belief systems, everything that I
Yeah.
thought to be true.
And this is when the beginning of the shedding of the old self. This is when the
Yeah,
suicidal thoughts and this
yeah,
pain kind of
yeah.
came up.
I'd had those experiences before, but it wasn't because I was looking at my stuff. It was because I wasn't able to deal with the pain, and so and again, I was very intellectually savvy. Like I knew stuff, but I wasn't embodied, and
Hmm.
I didn't have the tools to deal with that pain. And so most of my life, I just suppressed it. I let it come up a little bit, very, very little superficial, surface level stuff, and then push it back down again because it was too intense. But this time I made a commitment to just go all in, no matter how intense it got. And it took me to multiple edges. That was my experience, and that was also liberating at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. So tell me a little bit about those tools. I mean, were you obviously this is personal stuff, so if you don't feel comfortable sharing, it's all good. But were you
No
seeing a
problem.
therapist? Like, you were working with a coach? Like, where were these tools? Because I've been through similar stages, luckily not as dark as suicidal thoughts, but certainly extreme, intense, transformational experiences that kind of leave
Mm,
you open and vulnerable in the world, kind
mm,
of like spinning, right? Like the way
mm.
we kind of shifting our identities and the way we show up, and it can be incredibly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, like, how did you, you're experiencing this pain, you committed to go fully in it. How did you work through that pain? What were tools that you used?
Mm,
Did you get support around you? Um,
mm.
yeah, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, it was. I have a six-step cyclical framework that I unconsciously, accidentally created in the process. But to answer the
Mm,
question directly, and I'll go back to the framework of that in a moment. But there was
yeah,
energy
please.
healing, there was spiritual healing, there was therapy, there was counseling, there was psychology. There was a variety of different tools. I leaned on others for support. I deliberately spent a lot of time on my own. I had coaches as well. I went all in. I meditated for hours every day. I spent time in nature. I've always been exercising. In fact, for me, physical movement and exercise was even a maladaptive coping strategy. In order to avoid my pain, I would excessively exercise and compete to be so tired that I wouldn't be out. I would numb myself. It was a form of numbing for me.
Right.
But then I changed that and started healthily engaging in physical activity and movement, and that was a tool as well for healing massively. But it was a combination of spending time on my own, nurturing my own self, changing the way I spoke to myself, the way I looked at life, my belief systems, my own internal substructures of reality. And that was a combination of getting support from external help, but very, very much deliberately spending time in solitude and allowing myself to feel and emote and express and be and begin to express emotions that were very difficult for me to express in a more healthy way, in a non-judgmental way. And that's a process,
Mm,
man. I mean, and I was doing that for years, but I wasn't doing it in this way. And so
mm,
everything I'd learned before, my background in my formal studies in psychology and behavioral science and social psychology, they helped because it gave me access points and it gave me landmarks. But then I had to go deep into that, and really, it was there was the support that I was receiving from loved ones and the solitude, the deliberate solitude that really was liberating for me.
yeah,
And not being attached. I want to be making
mm,
something very clear.
yeah,
The ethos and the approach of not being attached to an outcome. In other words, I'm not doing this to heal, or I'm not doing this to liberate. That is beautiful that that's happening, but I'm doing this because I just need to explore, and that's it. And so if I end up in a mental asylum, if I end up committing suicide, if I end up homeless, if I end up whatever it is, then I just have to be okay with it. I'm not going to be attached to an outcome. So my actions weren't driven by so much an outcome, like to release the pain. It was driven by exploration itself, and that was a very hard path to reconcile.
yeah, absolutely. Like really diving deep into that pain is not
Mm,
fun, but it is
mm-mm.
necessary to kind of come out on the other side, right?
Yeah.
Um, wow. I'm curious. You're talking about releasing emotions in this way. What do you mean by this way? I mean, like
An
you
example.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so an example for me, well, I spent hours on my lounge room floor, and I was very blessed to even have a lounge room. Like that's the level of deep, deep gratitude that I reach, and continue to
hmm
explore that level of gratitude today. I spent hours on my lounge room floor just crying and screaming,
Mm,
hours every day, crying and screaming and
wow.
raging and letting out all this suppressed stuff. And I had no idea where it was coming from at the time. I was so much pain and just allowing myself to howl and to scream and to cry and to rage and to to go and hit my boxing bag and just uh, and while I'm screaming and crying and just whatever it took to move energy through my body was a prerogative and a primary directive for me.
Wow, wow, that's fantastic. Yeah, I actually had a couple weeks ago, I actually shared this on LinkedIn, but I had a similar experience. I was like screaming and punching a pillow. I wish I had a punching bag at home, but I was punching a
Mm,
pillow for probably about 15, 20 minutes, screaming on the top of my lungs, being really conscious that
powerful.
I knew like something, it was frustration, built up frustration of years of thoughts of not
Yeah,
being enough.
yeah,
And things like that, and just fucking letting it release through me. It was the only
yep.
way. And
Got to move it.
yeah, you got to give it attention. You got to move it. And it's I felt so good. I broke into tears for a while. I was crying,
Mm,
and it felt amazing at the end. I worked through it. Kind of that energy had released.
yeah.
Um, wow. So on the other side, so you shed this old layer of who you are. So who are you today, and like how do you sustain this new self? I mean, a big question, who are you today, but in relation to yourself and how you sustain this new self of creating healthy relationships and what it is to be a healthy man, um, etc. I guess the question is, how do you sustain this new self
Mm.
every day?
Like any habit, it's almost self-sustaining. And so once I developed a new baseline for myself and really got clear on who I wanted to be in the world and what my belief systems were, what my values were, and how I wanted to show up to myself and to others, I just keep practicing that every day and it becomes the norm for me. So it doesn't become so conscious, it becomes now unconscious. The only difference is
Right.
not the only difference, but the massive difference is that this unconscious practice was once more deliberate, and it still has to be deliberate on a daily basis as well. I have to keep myself in check, not because I have these thoughts or feelings of being a delinquent or hurting others in any capacity. It's just more, am I still on my true north? Can I evolve this even further? Can I deepen this practice? Can I deepen my presence?
Mm,
Can I expand myself and sense of self in the world and how I treat others? It's just constantly querying, hey, am I being the best version of myself right now? And so how I maintain that is through having established that new baseline that I'm very deeply connected to. And it
hmm
becomes almost effortless. I'm pulled towards that every day. I'm inspired to be this
mm.
person, to be this type of person in the world. And there are so many facets to that compared to who I was many, many years ago.
Right. And that baseline that you speak of are really this rewiring of values and beliefs that you now live your life in
Mm,
alignment with, right? In
mm.
congruence. And so
Yes.
all of your actions, your decisions, the way you speak, the way you treat yourself are in alignment with these beliefs and values. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's really interesting. I think anyone who's, listening who might be looking to make a major shift in their life or really shed the old layer off, would you say that's a good place to start, Stephanos? I imagine, like, let's get clear on where you want to shift your values and your beliefs.
Yeah.
That's the blueprint. If you're building a house, like that's where you start, and that's how you make this thing a reality. Would you agree with
Yeah.
that? Yeah.
Yeah. Awareness and self exploration lends itself to clarity. So having a willingness and a yearning to explore oneself and be greater self aware of what makes us tick, what drives us, whether it's in business, whether it's in entrepreneurial venture, whether it's in global service, whether it's an intimate relationship, getting clear on who we are and what we want really maximizes the opportunity of us living an open, fruitful, connected life. And all the good things in life that we really value, and it helps us live in alignment, essentially.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I'd love to talk a bit about relationships. I know this is something you work a lot with your clients,
Mm,
right? And it's a
mm,
big part
mm,
of your
mm.
work. Um, Yeah, obviously, this is important for anyone listening. As a human, as humans, we have relationships, many relationships, and they can be quite nuanced and different, and so on. But what do you teach your clients in this realm, Stephanos? Like, I mean, like, what makes a good relationship, and Yeah. Like, can you tell us a little bit about how you work with your clients in that sense?
Yeah, of course. And so there are many factors that contribute to making or creating a healthy relationship. And the first is I always like to is something a principle I call self-gnosis. And it's really embodying wisdom and awareness, which is what we spoke to a moment ago, around self, like really getting to know yourself and getting to know what you want and bringing that clarity into relationships so that you're not hiding in relationship, you're not unclear. Because when we're unclear, we're not safe because there's too much uncertainty.
Hmm.
So that uncertainty breeds instability in the relationship. So people struggle to trust us. People struggle to open themselves up to us. They struggle to be vulnerable. Then we struggle to be vulnerable. And it becomes this domino effect, this cascading effect of invulnerability and separation and isolation in the relationship. So when you know yourself, you can communicate with greater clarity as well. So communication is an important tool in relationships, but it's not everything. It's how we communicate that's actually more important. But how you
Mm.
communicate is really predicated on the level of deep inner work that you've done as a human being on yourself and the level of awareness and knowledge and wisdom you have around who you are. And so for me, that's been a very important part of my life is to be able to become more self-aware, become confident in who I am, and then express that in relationship. And
Hmm.
so when I'm able to express that in relationship with greater clarity and certainty, it removes judgment, or excessive judgment. It removes uncertainty. It removes the volatility of what can happen of people feeling unsafe and then coming from fear and coming from their own wounding. And so we can begin to see beyond that and elicit greater levels of self-compassion and compassion for others, empathy and understanding. And so the whole dynamic shifts in terms of how we show up to the relationship and what our end goal or evolving end goal is. And so we're not coming from a place of I have to prove myself to be right. I need to satisfy my ego, or I need to
Hmm.
win this conversation or this argument. But we come to a point of what's mutually beneficial for us here, for us both. What is the outcome that we both really desire with respect to being in this relationship, with respect to this particular conversation that we're having, with respect to our goals and our ambitions and our dreams that we want to share together? How do we want to show up? Do we want to show up in a trusting, loving manner that where we can respect each other's viewpoints, or do we want to
Mm.
show up coming from our old wounding, which is either attacking or defensive or retracting or maladapting coping strategies that we developed when we were children, that we're bringing into our adult lives that don't really serve this relationship, but we're just being triggered unconsciously and we're just playing to that tune because that's all we know. And so
Right.
self-awareness is a big thing, man. I mean, I can go into effort, I can go into willingness, I can go into strategies for for creating intimate moments in our lives that build upon each other and actually develop deeper levels of trust and connection and unity. It depends
Yeah.
where you want to go with it.
I'd love to hear the strategies. It sounds like
Yeah.
you're really working with your clients of breaking out of this self, me paradigm and into a
Yes.
more empathetic state, right?
Yes.
And really, but
Yeah.
yeah, I'd love to hear the strategies. What are some strategies for us to create more intimacy in our relationships?
Yeah. Again, there's many, and I'll just share. I'll start with a couple, and we can just build from
Perfect.
there. And I'll just
Perfect.
start with some simple ones, man. And I don't want to say that they're superficial. They're not superficial at all, but they're just simple, and that we really neglect them. And so one of them is variety. We forget how important having variety is in our intimate relationships. And so what I mean by that, and you can express and experience variety in many different ways. It
Mm.
could literally mean with your partner, if you're both foodies, for example, going to a different restaurant every week or every 2 weeks or every month, whatever's in your but I mean, I'm not really a fan of the term budget, but whatever's in your allocations, right? However that
Yeah.
works. So you go to
Yeah.
a
I
different
like that.
picnic spot every week, whatever. I want to be mindful
Hmm.
because I know that a lot of your audience are entrepreneurs, and I know having been an entrepreneur, or am an entrepreneur, but there's been some very tough times where money has been not very, very abundant in my life because
Yes.
it's
Yes.
been
Yes.
poured
Yes.
into
I know
the
that.
business and into the service. Um,
Totally.
and even oh man, it's just yeah. Anyway, so I get that, but I'll
Yeah.
give you an example, right? And so having variety and novelty in relationship is so important because you're sharing new experiences together, and
Yeah.
you're rewiring or you're wiring uh, neurology in both of your brains that you're sharing cohesively together, and that's
Mm.
that's really cool to do that. And
That
so just not
that
only at a neurological,
co-experience.
yeah,
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 yeah.
you're co-wiring together. And so there's a sharing that's transpiring there
Mhm.
electromagnetically as well. And you're sharing experiences that you both have never shared and never experienced before. There's a power in that. Fun and play, man. Fun and play are so important just in life, full stop. We get so serious about life. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
we get
yeah.
so fucking serious about life that we forget to have some fun and have some play. And that could be what it could be engaging in a hobby. It could be like the other day I went to a trampoline park, an indoor trampoline park.
That's
It was
dope. I've
epic.
never been to one of
Oh,
those. I've always wanted to
so
do it,
good.
man. Do like a
Man, there was
backflip and a slam
it was
dunk or
great.
something.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
there was dodgeball there. It
Oh,
was
fuck
great.
yeah.
I was sweating my ass off. It was amazing. And they're all
Yeah.
kids, it was there for a little birthday party. It was a friend of mine. It was a 10-year-old, her 10-year-old's birthday or 7-year-old's birthday party. So we're gonna have to have fun, man. You have to have
That's
fun.
awesome.
And
Yeah.
so you just choose what's fun for you, and you do it. Everyone's different. Right? Fun for you may be reading a book, overlooking a lake or something. That's cool too. Do more of
Yeah.
what is
Okay.
fun and for you, but also be playful too, and do things that are different. Again, that novelty, it really feeds into that. That's really, really
Mm.
powerful.
Do you
And then,
do you, I wanna just ask a question to dive more into
sure,
I think and I fall into this trap, and I think a lot of people do, like, getting caught in the seriousness of life, like, we take life way too
yeah,
fucking seriously, like you said, so, what are some strategies to, like, create awareness around when we're taking life too seriously, and how can we implement more play? Yeah, if there's any simple tips you have there for just implementing more play into our life, into our consciousness, into our you know
yeah, yeah, for sure. I'd start by taking an emotional inventory of your life. So here's a really good
Mhm.
here's one good tool that you could start with. So, and this requires a little bit of effort, right? And so
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
bear with this, and you can do this as you like. So you can be really adamant with it, and for 30 days, or you can do 30 days, 60 days, or 90 days. It doesn't really matter. You can do it for a week if you want, but give it at least 30 days if you can. On the hour, every hour that you're awake, put an alarm on your phone or your watch and take note of what you're feeling and experiencing. So are
Yes.
you angry? Are you sad? Are you frustrated? Do you feel pressure? Are you overwhelmed? Are you joyful? Just take note of it. One or two words just describing your state. Even a sentence is fine. And then it depends how technical you want to get with this, but you can plot this on an
Mhm.
Excel spreadsheet if you like. I'm not an Excel person, but this can
Oh,
work for
nice.
someone that is an Excel person, right?
Sure, sure.
And so you would plot this for 90 days and you would start to see what you're experiencing. And if you're noticing that you're really overwhelmed, that you're really frustrated, that you're experiencing more quote unquote negative emotions, there's no really negative or positive emotions, but you're experiencing more undesirable emotions than you'd like, then you know you need to do something about that. And there's a reason why. So then you can go to the source of that. You can look at why are you experiencing stress and overwhelm or frustration in your world? Why is that happening? And then you can implement some strategies around, and the strategy is just take some fucking action. You just got to do something different.
Yeah,
That's the strategy.
right.
You just got to do it. And
Yeah.
then you can say, okay, this is ridiculous. I'm noticing that I'm frustrated 80% of the time, 90% of the time, or that I'm down 90% of the time. And this is just not, I'm
Right.
just not happy with this.
Fuck,
Now,
yeah.
that's an interesting way to do it. That's one way to do it.
That's
And then,
cool. It creates
yeah,
a lot of awareness and daily
definitely,
action and
life
yeah, it's
inventory.
very cool. Yeah, yeah.
Definitely. And then you can just get clear on what's fun for you or what could be fun. You may go, oh, I don't know, I don't know. And just what if you did know? What would be fun for you if you did? And then you may say, well, I've always wanted to try indoor skydiving. Well, then great, go indoor
Go
skydiving.
fucking do it. Yeah, right.
Try it. If it doesn't work, then if it wasn't that fun, then great. You know it's not that fun. Maybe it's hiking up in the mountains. Then go
Yeah,
do that.
yeah.
Maybe it's going to like an arcade. We call it, I don't know, like an arcade where you're playing video games. Great, go do that.
Yeah.
That's your release. Maybe beyond all of that, it's actually showing up differently in your workplace. Maybe it's taking a different perspective on your boss and saying, maybe my boss isn't such an asshole. Maybe he or she are actually trying to help me in a particular way. How can I see this differently? How can I show up to work in a smile? Maybe I'm going to start having a green juice in the morning instead of 4 coffees. Maybe it's
Mhm.
that type of thing that brings more joy and fun in your life because you're having an internal perspective switch. It's not always
Yeah.
about externalizing it and creating an external experience. Maybe it's an internal shift. But again, that comes with explored self-awareness.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it's really approaching life as the scientist, like as experimenting,
Yeah.
experiment, and really bringing play and fun into that process. If we're serious about the experimenting and we try something and it doesn't work, and we're like, "Fuck this," and to get down on
Mm,
ourselves, then you know what? You're playing a losing game there. It's just bringing fun into that experimenting process. So I love that.
yeah.
That is awesome. Um, cool. Thanks for diving into that.
Yeah.
Uh, so for the strategies to create more intimacy, do you have more? I imagine you do. So right now we
Yeah.
have variety, and then we have fun and play. And I think you were
Yeah.
gonna dive into some more there.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. Absolutely. So, um, and this is all for developing deeper intimacy, right?
right.
Yeah. So, it's something I call authentic vulnerability. And,
Mm,
or for men, particularly when I'm working with men, I call it vertical vulnerability. And so for men, what this looks like is an ability to share their experiences with their partners, with their lovers, with their children, with their fathers, with their brothers. Because intimacy just isn't defined by sexual or romantic intimacy. There's varied intimacy. And in
mm,
fact, that's another strategy, and I'll talk about that in a moment.
cool.
But the intimacy is not just sexual or emotional. You can share intimacy with a friend. You can share intimacy with a colleague. You can share intimacy with a client. You and I are being intimate right now. We're having a deep conversation around really important stuff,
Right.
and we're choosing to be really honest with each other. And at the level that we can be, that we can meet ourselves at, right? And so that's happening. We're having an intimate conversation, intimate relationship right now.
Hmm.
And so vertical vulnerability for men particularly is very important. They step into, I don't want to go too deep into this because this is a rabbit hole of masculinity and femininity. And I only
Sure. Sure.
use those terms because they tend to be more familiar for people than energy of be and do or go and flow. But
Hmm.
we're just talking essentially to the dichotomy of how we experience the world in duality. That's it. It's just
Cool.
how it's dual energies that reside within every single human being, and they
Hmm.
give balance and harmony to how we express in the world. And
Right.
so, vertical vulnerability for a man is being able to express oneself, but with confidence and certainty, but be very real with who they are and what they're experiencing and what they're feeling.
Hmm.
And so, being able to share one's innermost thoughts and feelings, and even some secrets around self with someone else, is very bonding and binding, and it deepens intimacy, it deepens connection,
Yeah.
it deepens the substance of the relationship. So sharing one's thoughts on a regular basis and one's feelings on a regular basis, not from a place of volatility or craziness per se. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but if you did that too often, it would be unsustainable in the
Right.
relationship.
Right.
But to share that just from an open place with, this is me, and I'm just giving you me, and I'm letting you see me. That's powerful, man. When you let someone see you in your flaws, in your vulnerability, in your quote unquote weaknesses,
Fuck
in
yeah.
in that's powerful, man. That deepens intimacy and it deepens trust
Right.
massively.
It also deepens inner strength too, right? I mean, like
Yeah.
being able to express from from an empowered
Yes.
place, but a vulnerable place of like, hey,
Yes.
I feel scared because
Mm,
I want a relationship to get to the next level and I feel
yeah.
scared about this conversation, just something like that. Um,
Yes.
wow, I
Sharing one's
do.
fears.
Yeah, right. The fears. I do want to recommend something. So those who are listening, it's really important when we're vulnerable to actually express real emotion, right? Uh, Being scared, being anxious, being sad, being happy. There's tons of emotions. So there's this website called atlasofemotions.org, I believe, or just Google Atlas of Emotions, and you build your emotional vocabulary. Most of us don't know past 7 emotions,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but once if we can build our emotional vocabulary, I've talked about this on other podcasts, we can really speak to our emotions from a deeper level, from a more nuanced and varied level, and being able to express more vulnerably and create more intimacy, etc. So anyway, yeah, Atlas of
That's
Emotions
a
is a great
that's a very
resource.
good website, bro. That's a
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's Paul Ekman.
Oh yeah.
Ekman. I'm pretty sure it's Paul Ekman. Ekman. I think it's Ekman, and he's a
Okay.
master of if I'm my memory serves me correctly, he's a master of micro expressions and understanding the subtleties and nuances of how we emote, express, and show ourselves in the world at a micro level. I'm pretty sure that's him. Pretty
Oh,
sure
fuck
that's
yeah.
him.
I think it is. Yeah,
Yeah,
it says on Google
yeah,
it's the Ekman thing. I've never
yeah,
heard of
yeah.
him.
He's a boss. Yeah, he's a
Okay.
boss, man. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, wow. Fuck yeah. Have you read anything by him, or how are you
Yeah, yeah, I
familiar?
have. I'm actually when I'm going back to Australia in a couple of days,
Uh-huh.
and which I'm very excited about. Surprise visit for my friends and family that don't know
Oh,
about it.
nice. Nice,
I've got
man.
all my library. Yeah, I've got my library there, so I'm gonna bring some of my books, and I've got about 3 or 4 of his books.
Okay.
I've read a couple of them, but there's a couple that I haven't read. I'm gonna bring them all back and look over them again. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, shoot me a message of what you're reading, and I'll share
yeah,
with the
absolutely. I'll
audience
take a
too.
snapshot. Yeah,
Yeah, I would
yeah,
love to see that.
yeah,
Okay, cool. Cool. Okay, so we got authenticity, the
yeah.
vertical vulnerability. So just
Yes,
expressing authentically what's
yes,
going on.
yeah.
Um, anything else when it comes to intimacy?
Plenty, but
Yeah.
let's go because I mentioned intimacy, right? And so there's what I call something that's called varied intimacy. So there's at least 11 forms or expressions of intimacy. And so what I suggest that people do is share multiple forms of intimacy with each other to deepen their overall connection and understanding to each other. So, for
Hmm.
example, you can share intellectual intimacy. You and I right now are sharing intellectual intimacy. We're
Right.
sharing ideas and we're talking about issues.
Mm,
Even if we were getting into quote unquote an argument or debating about an opinions, if we can still respect each other, our beliefs and our views, and still choose to move through that, we're actually bonding and binding together.
yeah. Yeah.
But doing this deliberately with intent. Intention is everything in relationship. That's another thing. Like you've got to carry intent in everything that you do because that will deepen it will root down
Mm,
the connection that's being formed.
right.
Another form of intimacy is conflict intimacy or crisis intimacy. Now, I'm not necessarily advising people to go into a war-torn country and share an experience together. But what you will see is that soldiers, for example, share very deep intimacy because
Hmm.
they share crises together. Again, this can be external or internal. So when you're having an argument or a disagreement, you're in a conflict.
Yep.
Your
Hmm.
ability to work through those differences in a fair and equitable way and reach solutions essentially that are broadly and mutually satisfactory at the least, and recognizing that perfect solutions are not part of human life helps you develop conflict intimacy, helps you develop deep intimacy because you're
Hmm.
building trust in how you show up to difficulty and challenge. So, and again, there's aesthetic intimacy, just going to an art gallery together and sharing in an experience of, wow, this art, everything that went in that, and sharing that bond together and learning something new together as well. That's
Yeah.
intimacy. So you can
Interesting.
see there's a lot there, right?
Yeah, it seems like it is a mix of the variety, fun and
Mm,
play, authentic expression and
mm,
vulnerability, and like
mm,
that kind of like trifecta uh,
mm,
creates deeper and deeper intimacy. So I love that
mm,
formula.
mm,
It's badass. I'm kind of curious to hear you talk about ego deaths, or you've experienced
mm,
some ego deaths,
mm,
and I'd love to hear a little bit more of that. I've heard of ego deaths. I think
mm,
I've experienced some of my own through different
mm.
psychedelic experiences,
Oh
and
yeah.
through meditation as well. But
Yeah.
heard Michael Pollan speak of this with his book, How to Change Your Mind. It's a big topic in it. Um, but yeah, what is an ego death? And I'd love to dive a little bit into your experience and how that's played a role in your life.
Mm,
But first, like, what is an ego death? What does that even mean?
yeah. So the way I define it is that it's a detachment and a releasing of the labels that have defined us. So, for example, this is an interesting one.
Hmm.
Say you're a parent and your child passes over, and you have one child, and that child physically dies. That label of you, I mean, you're always going to be a parent per se because you've been a parent, but you're no longer a parent in that physical sense. And
Hmm.
so that label, that title that you've given yourself, that society's given you, that no longer applies to you. And there's a gray area there. Like as I said, you're always going to be a parent. Once you're a parent, you're always a parent. It's just,
Right.
I think that's the way it is, really, because that the energy that you bring into the world from that. But detaching from that can be very, very painful. And
Mhm.
having that association that you made was, this is who I was, this is part of who I was in the world, I'm no longer that person, and really releasing that, that's the process of having an ego death. Another
Mhm.
example could be athletes that were professional athletes, and
Mhm.
that comes to an end, and they're no longer a professional athlete. What do they do with themselves?
Right.
Soldiers that
Mhm.
that that again, this is a label, right? This is an outward label. This is, when I
Mhm.
say outward, a label in the world. You are a soldier. You're
You're
a special
viewed
force
by
of soldier.
others
Yeah,
as
this is what
such.
you
Yeah.
do. This is who you are. But you're no
Right.
longer a soldier anymore. Who are you? What are you? So coming to terms with that and letting that go. Yeah, there's parts of you that will always be a soldier. There's parts of you that will always be a professional athlete per se. But you're no longer that now. So how do you reconcile that? And what so many people do is, when they can't reconcile those labels that they've attached to, is they go into avoidance, or that, workaholism, alcoholism, drugs, TV. They numb themselves because they can't deal with the fact that they're no longer that, quote unquote, that person anymore.
Mm.
And so for me personally, it was, I'm this type of person. I'm a person that's unfaithful. I'm a person that's dishonest. I'm
Mm.
a person that has gone against my own personal values. I looked at everything that I was, and I started dissolving those labels. And that essentially is an ego death. How we relate to the world and to our environment, and all the multiple labels that we put on ourselves, when those labels no longer serve us and we start to dissolve them, that's an ego death. It's a psychological, psycho-spiritual, psycho-emotional process. Probably
Mm.
should have started with that. And so
Yeah.
that's essentially what it is. And so going through that, though, is painful. It's annihilation. It feels like it's physical death, because the psyche is hanging on. The reason why the psyche is hanging on is because those labels are familiar. Familiarity equates to safety. Safety is the major prerogative and drive of the brain and the body. So
Mhm.
it does not want to let go because it feels unsafe. Therefore, it feels like it's going to die. Therefore, that's what happens. Literally,
Mm.
parts of you, your psyche, die. And so
Mm.
it's a very painful place to be, generally speaking. But there's tremendous liberation and freedom that comes from it as well.
Yeah, right. Why, I mean, why is it worth the pain and the psychic pain to go through an ego death? What's the benefit on the other side?
We get to redefine ourselves, and we get to be a new version of ourselves that's greater aligned with our authentic and congruent values. Because most of the time we're living a life that is not ours. It's other people's values or societal values that are imposed upon us. It's labels that we've created for ourselves to, at some stage, keep us safe, but they no longer really serve us. Or we're tired of them. They have an expiry date. Maybe they're not necessarily bad, but they don't serve us anymore. They don't interest us anymore. And so when we hang on to them, we become stagnant. And so
Mm.
stagnation is the antithesis of growth. And growth is, again, in my opinion, growth is, and expansion is why we're here. It's love, it's growth,
Mm.
it's expansion, it's connection, it's unity, it's everything as to why we're here
Non-attachment
as human
too.
beings. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
part of it.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. So, I mean, going through life as a human, it seems almost impossible not to at least identify with some labels that society puts on us. Us who are
Yeah,
entrepreneurs, I have that
yeah.
label. So, do you believe there's a healthy way to kind of go about this kind of labeling and way of thinking of it and living it that is not toxic in terms of attachment to that? So, does that make
Mm,
sense? You know what I mean?
it does.
Like how can we go through life living as a parent, a brother, whatever, um, but not letting that toxify actually who we are?
Yeah, and it's not so much. I mean, some labels or some attachments to labels can toxify us in terms of that they're extreme, that compounded over long periods of time and demonstrated in an intense fashion can be really extreme for us, and they don't serve us in that way. The way that we move out of our labels that no longer serve us is essentially to be self-aware and asking those questions.
Mm,
It's
hmm.
a self-exploration. It's
Yeah.
really taking inventory of our lives on a regular basis and asking, this position that I'm in, this, I'm an entrepreneur. Is that really who I want to be in the world? Is that how I want to primarily define myself? Or
Mm,
do I want to spend my time, my energy, my resources in another way? I'm an accountant. Is that really what I want to do in the world? Like, is that really what I want to be in the world? Is that really how I want to spend at least 40% of my life? I don't know. I don't think so. That's not a label that I want. Okay, so if I'm not an accountant, what am I? And people start to panic then, because
yeah,
that gives them
it's
income,
scary.
that gives them identification. It's a self identity. It's
Yeah.
people see you, and well, if I'm not an accountant, then what am I going to be to others? And how do I come home and tell my husband that I don't want to be an accountant anymore? And what about how my financial contribution contributes to our household? And well, and all these things come into play. And what
Yeah,
about my
it's like,
friends? What are they going to think of me?
yeah, the ground is fucking ripped off right under
Yep,
your feet, right?
it
And you're
turns to
spinning out of
dust.
control. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
quicksand and
Um,
dust.
yeah, fascinating. Yeah, just the non-attachment and just really the awareness. I mean, it's awareness is really making sense to me right now. Awareness is the secret sauce to life, right? We can harness that through
Mm.
meditation, through the timer on the phone, through journaling, through things like this. But really, meditation, at least for me, that's why it's so important. Gives us awareness into everything we're experiencing. That's at least the goal. Um, but anyway, thank you, Stefanos. Thank you, brother, for this session. We have to do it again.
Yeah,
Before
100%.
we head off here on this episode, first, where can people find you? Are on social media, things like that? Where's the best places to follow you?
Yeah, absolutely. So Stefanos Sifandos, Stefanos is my first name. My last name Sifandos, Sifandos. Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and my website, stefanosstefandos.com would be the best places to find me.
Dope, cool, and I'll include those in the notes.
Yeah.
And then my last question for you, brother. We got this from Tim Ferriss, so thank you, Tim. Um, metaphorically speaking, to get a message out to millions of people,
Mm.
what would you put on a billboard? So it could be anything at all. It could be a word, a quote, a picture, right? Just the other day, we had someone put a whale on it, and a whale and something else. I thought it was amazing. But yeah, anyway, what would you put on that billboard to get a message out to millions of people?
That's such a cool question, man. I love that. Honestly, I have no fucking idea. But if I had to have but if I had to have an idea, I do have an idea. I would put the question, "Are you willing?" Dot 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 question mark.
Hmm. And what do you mean by that?
That's my point. And then at the bottom, I'd have a little website or an access point where people can go and inquire about that. And then all of a
I
sudden,
like
you've got a lot of traffic coming to a website.
it.
For me, brother, what I mean by is I want to honor your question. What I really mean by that is, are you? And it has many, many meanings, and part of it is actually subjective. But are you willing to do the work? Are you willing to go deep within yourself? Are you willing to celebrate life? Are you willing to experience pain and challenge? Are you willing to go to places where most people aren't willing to go? Are you willing to trust when your heart's been broken? Are you willing to love when you've been hurt? Are you willing to experience and experiment something new? Are you willing to drop it all right now and just do something crazy like move country, just like that? Are you willing to follow your heart and your intuition? Are you willing to learn new skills? Are you just fucking willing?
Fuck yes. I love that.
Mm.
I am willing. Thank you for being willing to come on the show today. And thanks for your work.
Thank you.
Thanks for being willing to show up in the world so powerfully. So thank
Thank
you,
you, bro.
Stefanos. Enjoy your travels, and
Thank
we'll
you.
be in touch, man. Thanks for being on
Thank
the
you, my
show.
man.
Cheers. Hey, y'all. Thank you so much for listening. We love you. If you like the show, please subscribe for free. You can do that on iTunes, on your Apple Podcast app, on SoundCloud, Spotify. Please leave a review. We'd love to hear what you think. You can reach out to us at podcast@serenityventures.org. Alrighty, everyone. We love you. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week.